Now, according to official figures, the Russian economy has fallen into decline for the first time in 5 years. Russia's GDP has fallen by 0.5% at the year to November, the latest sign that the country is heading for recession. The worse-than-expected figures sent the ruble tumbling on Monday after staging a slight recovery in recent weeks. It fell to trade at around 56 to the dollar. The recent collapse in oil prices and Western sanctions have battered the Russian economy, forcing drastic interventions from the Russian central bank and creating the biggest crisis in Vladimir Putin's leadership of the country. Now joining us via Skype to discuss this is political analyst Fra Hughes. Now we know that the Russian economy has contracted for the first time in 5 years. If this happens in 2 consecutive quarters, Russia will officially be in recession. Is this likely to happen?
Yes, I think very much so. In fact, there are a lot of analysts in Russia, economists, bankers who have all said that they fully expect Russia in the first quarter of 2015 to be in an official recession. Now, obviously the recession has come about due to the rise in inflation, which is above 10%. It's due to the fall in the ruble, which is inextricably linked to the fall and the plummeting fall, indeed, of oil prices. Added to the sanctions from America, NATO and Europe, and the counter-sanctions that have been imposed by Russia itself on foreign imports, I think 2015 will indeed be the first time since 2009 that Russia has gone into recession.
Now, with the Western sanctions that you mentioned in place and sliding oil prices, can Russia do much to avoid a slide into recession?
In the short term, the answer to that has to be no. Although they have huge international reserves, financial reserves, which should cover them for the next 12 to 18 months, it is undoubtedly the fall of the oil price, which has gone from above $100 to between $60 and $70 per barrel at the moment, that it's caused this decline in Russian output and indeed the tax revenue from the oil itself. But I think a question that should be asked is, why is OPEC and especially Saudi Arabia allowing the price of oil to just plummet? They're talking about perhaps $50 per barrel next year. And you think that geopolitically, Russia is being isolated by America and Europe, and the people who are going to benefit in the long term from the fall in the oil prices are people who want to see Russia further isolated in an extension of the Cold War.
You're saying that those are the people that are mostly going to be affected. I mean, what would a slide into recession mean for the neighbouring countries? I'm talking here about Belarus and the global economy at large.
Well, obviously there will be a knock-on. If there's any sanctions against any country in the world that affects the balance of the books, import, export, it could have a devastating short-term effect. But I think in the last few years, you've already seen Russia has moved closer to China, Brazil and India and countries like Venezuela, perhaps Iran and Syria. So it's partly an economic rebalance. America and the West are trying to impose sanctions, possibly regime change, certainly isolation on Russia. Russia in the short term will have to batten down the hatches, find some way to create further international markets outside of America and Europe, and form some kind of more centralization within Russia to try and protect the ruble.
Now, you mentioned China. China stands to lose a lot if Russian economy deteriorates much further. They've signed quite a bit of deals, and so are we likely to see some sort of intervention from China in 2015?
Well, it would make sense, because if you remember, actually a lot of the banks in America which failed under the capitalist financial system there when we went into the financial world recession of 2007, it was actually the Bank of China that went in and helped prop up and support American banks. So you may very well find that in Russia. But I find it very interesting that the sanctions and the attack upon the ruble and the fall of the oil prices on Russia, when you see that all failed against Cuba, and America is now in the process of of re-establishing relationships with Cuba, and at the same time trying to further isolate Russia. So it's interesting geopolitical times in the year ahead.
Fra Hughes, political analyst, thank you very much for joining us today.